Thank you all for coming, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties. We want to welcome you to our second virtual roundtable, and we want to open up the conversations discussing the myths surrounding homelessness. We're going to talk about what the Midnight Mission is doing to assist our homeless neighbors, what people like you can do to help, and we do value your time, and we are very thankful that you were so patient with us in the beginning getting on, but we purposely will make this 30-minute sessions. So because of the limited amount of time, if you do have questions, please just put them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. Our panel tonight is going to be Mike Arnold, our president and CEO of the Midnight Mission, Georgia Berkovich, the director of public affairs at the Midnight Mission, and Jo Alva. She is an alumnus of our Homelight Family Living. Mike Arnold, for the last 2 decades, has been an innovative leader in all issues concerning homelessness. So tonight, he is going to discuss with us the myth that permanent supportive housing is the only solution to the homelessness crisis. Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Heidi, and thank all of you for taking time out for coming and visiting with us. I like to kind of think of these as more sort of informal fireside kinds of chats with the goal of sharing what we know, talking about issues that we know are important to people. And I want to start out by just acknowledging and thanking you all, because the fact that you're here means you care about the issues that we care about. You care about homelessness, you care about the people that we serve, and you care about the Midnight Mission. So our topic, and I've deliberately tried to keep it a little provocative, is dealing with myths that I think are going out, that are part of the current narrative. And mine is kind of a teaser, because I think we know that ultimately getting people housed solves homelessness. I think what I really want to address is how the narrative is really is pushed by different incentives and different groups of folks that kind of don't give a broad and full picture of what's really being done and the importance of a multitude of interventions. So over the past, I guess it was about 6 years ago or so, we were in a situation where we literally had almost no permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing is housing that is affordable to low income or no income people. And it has a rich array, or at least is supposed to have a rich array of supportive services that would include case management, that would include mental health, physical health services, because people who go into permanent supportive housing are people who we expect are going to need a high level of supports for as long as we can see into the future. And that's kind of how it gets the name permanent. Now, what's interesting in the whole conversation when we're talking about homelessness is that chronically homeless, which that particular intervention is specifically designed for, only represents between 25 and 30% of our homeless population here in Los Angeles. So I think what the myth part of this is that if we focus on permanent supportive housing, we're going to solve homelessness. And the reality is that we've got between around 75 to 70% of our population that actually need a different kind of intervention that actually is less costly than permanent supportive housing. So we know that that permanent supportive housing is a great resource. We're big supporters of permanent supportive housing, and I want to make sure that message gets across there too. But I think it's not a monolithic solution. It's not a monochromatic solution. And I think it's really important that we understand that there's a whole continuum of services that go into solving the problem that we have. And I'm going to kind of just quickly walk through each of those segments and talk about why they're important and who they're intended to serve. So we've got to be able to shut the front door to homelessness. We've got to be focusing on how do we keep people from losing their housing, and how do we keep them in housing they have? Because we've learned from experience that keeping people housed is significantly cheaper and easier than it is to get them housed once they've fallen out of their housing. So prevention, or that front end piece, absolutely has to be a part of any system that's trying to solve homelessness. There are intermediate interventions, one of which is rapid rehousing, which again addresses people who are new to homelessness and need a helping hand to get back into housing quickly. And usually that kind of intervention is helping people to find housing that they can afford, and then providing the funding that it may take to get in, such as deposits, such as first and last month's rent. It may include a couple of months of rental supports, but it's really designed as a short-term intervention, and it doesn't have a lot of services associated with it, because the other thing we know about people experiencing homelessness is that the longer they are on the street and are homeless, the greater the amount of service interventions we need to invest in them to get them stable and to get them to a situation where they can be stable in housing. Sort of the next logical intervention is emergency shelter. And emergency shelters were really designed to be short-term places where people who lost their housing could settle down, get reconnected, get a little bit of help. And originally, they were designed to be for something less than 60 or 90 days worth of stay. Now, we know when you have no resources, emergency shelters tend to be places where people stay a lot longer. But it was designed for low need, low supportive services kinds of interventions where people could get settled, grounded, get clean clothes, cleaned up, and back out and find housing. Then the next level of intervention is what we call bridge or transitional housing, which is longer term period. And this specifically is for folks who may have be fleeing from domestic violence. They need longer than a 60 or 90-day stay to deal with the issues. Substance use disorder recovery, another. But again, those interventions are really only designed to be provided for maybe 9 to 18 months, and people resolve the issues that resulted in their episode of homelessness and then move on to realize more of their potential. One common thread that we know in homelessness is that everyone who's homeless needs housing. And what housing, and the point of all of these different interventions is that what housing is and is needed can and should vary significantly based on the individual that you are working with or trying to get housed. Permanent housing is one solution of many. It's a very important solution. It's also a very expensive solution. And I think what I want to say is that when we're talking about solutions to homelessness, I think it's very important that we use the word and. We're not using the word or, because a lot of the interventions and a lot of the focus that has occurred over the course of the last probably 30 years is that our policymakers focus more on how much money do we have, rather than what will it actually cost to provide the interventions that people need to get back on their feet and become productive members in their local communities. So those are the interventions that are the primary interventions, and there are a number of other sort of ancillary interventions that go along with that. And I think it's also really important to say that none of them really stand on their own. Oftentimes, we are all working with partners that are able to provide mental health supports, that are able to provide physical health supports. So it really takes a team to put the pieces together, no matter where you are in that continuum of homelessness, to be able to move from the streets and move into a place that you can afford and where you're going to be stable. How much more time do I have, Georgia? I'm out. That's it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was wonderful. Our next panelist is Georgia Berkovich. She is the Director of Public Affairs, and she has worked relentlessly for the last 12 years to try to build relationships with our homeless community. She's going to dispel the myth that homeless people just don't want help. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am starting the timer. That's a note to self. I'm really grateful to be with you all tonight, and I'm so happy that we're doing this. I would like to especially welcome our friend Bill Cruz, who is visiting us from Australia. We have an international roundtable where we meet with other service providers from all over the world, and some of them were at our noon session today, and Bill is here at this session, and it's just wonderful to have partners like Bill. And thank you to everyone else for being here. I often have people say things to me like, well, you know, some homeless people don't want help. And I have to reframe that, because I think what we're meaning to say is that some people don't want the help they think that we're offering them. It is a matter of perception. You know, we see things through the lens of who we are, not as they are. So, for instance, how I'm raised, the values I'm brought up with, how I've learned to handle conflict, my mental health, the mental health of my family, all of those things form how I see the world. And so I can sit and I can look at somebody who's homeless and think, well, I can see clearly steps 1, 2, and 3, they need to do this, that, and that, and their problem is solved. Why aren't they doing that? And that's just not the perception that they may have. So I can look and I can see somebody who's homeless. Even today, after being here at the Midnight Mission, I've been an employee here for 12 years and I've been volunteering since 1993. And still I have that voice in the back of my head that says, that would never be me. And it wouldn't be me tomorrow, maybe. Homelessness doesn't happen overnight. It is slow and progressive. And what typically happens is you find yourself without a place to live, a job, maybe you lose a job, maybe you have a catastrophic illness in your family, something devastating, and you end up without a home. Maybe you'll stay with friends and family for a little while. Maybe you then feel that you've worn out your welcome there. Maybe you'll seek a shelter. You stay in the shelter, but now you're staying with strangers, you feel uncomfortable, and there's rules about when you have to come in and wake up, and that doesn't really work if you're going to keep your job. So you think, well, I'll just stay in my car until I can get back on my feet. Surely I'll be back on my feet soon. But then your car starts getting ticketed or towed. So now maybe you think, well, I'll just set up a tent in an area where there are services. And so this is a period of weeks and months and sometimes years where you're slowly having to lower your values to survive. And it doesn't happen overnight. So 6 months ago, when the drug dealer came by asking if you wanted something, you may have said no, but maybe you say yes today, maybe to get some relief, maybe to stay up at night to protect your family and your items. And sometimes I wonder if what comes first, is it the addiction that leads to the homelessness or homelessness that leads to addiction? And not everybody who is homeless is suffering with a substance use disorder. That's just the example I'm using right there. But so when we say to somebody, come into our program, we'll get you help, we have to back up and begin to have a relationship with someone and have trust. I know for me, I hit bottom when I was 24 years old. I started drinking early in my life. I was arrested for drinking in public. By the time I was 11, I had a serious drinking problem. By the time I was 24, I was a crack addict and I lost everything. I had one last place to live in my best friend's parents' basement, or else I would have been homeless. And I was introduced to a 12-step program where there were people who showed me that my life could be different. Until they showed me that, all I could see with my perception was that I was destined to live the kind of life that my mom and my grandma had lived. That was my only experience. I needed somebody to say, come and go with me. Let me show you a different way. And that's one of the things I love about the Midnight Mission, is that most of our staff are either in recovery like myself, or they're in recovery from homelessness and have actually gone through our program and are alumnus of our program. So when people say, you don't know how I feel, we can say, yes, we do. We're just a few 24 hours ahead of you. Come and go with us. We have a lot of progressive engagement opportunities here. We serve 3 meals a day every day, and that's an opportunity for us to get to know people in the community and build trust and build those relationships. We have a music and art program because we're an organization that knows that music and art is to the soul what food is to the body, and sometimes just as important. But these are also opportunities for us to slowly get to know people and to build that trust. And as people begin to trust us and begin to have those moments of hope, they're more apt to ask for help. The other thing I hear that kind of goes along this myth is that, organizations like that enable homeless people, serving them food and keeping them comfortable. Okay. So I just need to say, no one has ever dreamed of being homeless. There is no child who has dreams that someday this will be them. The people who are experiencing homelessness are you or me divided by circumstance. They were once filled with wonder and hope and joy. That is nobody's dream. And we're providing basic services to keep people alive. But I also have to say that we serve meals at the time we serve meals, and we serve what we serve. There is no choice. It's not like you can eat if you're, want to get up for a midnight snack, or you are a vegan, or you're lactose intolerant. You can't say, may I have another choice? So there's a lot of freedom and a lot of choice that's removed when you're experiencing homelessness. And maybe that tent that you're living in, it may not be very nice, but it's all you have. And it's the last bit of freedom you have. And we're asking you to give up the only thing that you know, your only security, to come inside and trust people you don't know, to provide you with services that you can't even begin to imagine, because it's not even something you ever thought you could have in your life, perhaps. And that's just trying to give you a kind of different perceptions of that idea that homeless people don't want help. I think we need to show them what is available, and then we guide them there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. And I'll remind you, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat so that we can ask our panelists. Our last panelist this evening is Jo Alva. She is a woman with lived experience in homelessness, and she's a graduate of our Homelight Family Living Program. She's going to share her amazing personal story and dispel the myth that we hear that homeless individuals are they're beyond redemption. And Jo's story will definitely prove that that is absolutely a myth. Jo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heidi. Georgia, that was amazing. I always love hearing from you ladies, and I just love this program. And so when I came to Homelight, I was a mother of 4. I had 1 child in my physical custody. I had just completed a 6-month inpatient program, and I was about 8 months into a sober living. Sober living is not a permanent situation. I was looking for housing. Unfortunately, I did not have a job. My only income was welfare, which was not a lot. And I could not afford housing. Like, I couldn't. I looked, and what I could afford was a studio, but for a family of 5, I didn't qualify, and I just started looking really hopeless and bleak. And, I was involved in a 12-step program. I still am. And somebody had told me about the Midnight Mission and their Homelight program. So I called, and I was able to get my DCFS worker to do a referral, and I was able to enter the program. Well, that day that I was able to enter the program, since I had a 3-bedroom apartment, thank you, Homelight, all of my kids were able to come live with me. At that point, my kids had not been in my physical custody or lived with me in about 2 years. So my 3 older children were able to come live with me. And as I stated, I am in a 12-step program. The services I really received at Homelight were amazing. I started drinking and using when I was about 13. I didn't stop until I was into my early 30s. I had my first child at 18, so that tells you those kids lived that lifestyle with me. Obviously being taken by DCFS, they faced a lot of traumatic events in their life and their short little lifespan that they had lived. And, entering Homelight, one of the things that we were able to access, which I absolutely love till this day, is counseling, therapy. I had my own individual therapy. The kids had their own individual therapy, and then we had therapy as a family unit, which to me was the foundation I was able to lay to kind of reconnect. I never knew how to be a mother or how to speak to the kids. Communication was not there. Another one of the services that I was able to access was their computers. They had computers. I mean, the kids had, I love Homelight. I wish I had more time to talk about Homelight, but they had, Mr. Ed that would come in, and while we were doing parenting class, there were just different types of classes. I remember they had people from UCLA come in, and they did I think it was like a 4-week workshop on how to do resumes, and they did resumes with us. Homelight was able to give me the opportunity to breathe. I got to Homelight, I had about a year and something of sobriety, and it's like, what's next? What's the next step? I never had a real job. I worked at Home Depot when I was like, I had 3 kids at that time. So I was like about 24, and I worked there for like a year. I never had a stable job. I'm not a high school graduate. I didn't have a license. And Homelight gave me that opportunity to sit there and say, okay, what's next? With mentors and people guiding me. And, so I was able to obtain my driver's license while I was at Homelight. And it was, I love Homelight. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but I love it. It was actually my counselor at Homelight who took me to the DMV to do my behind the wheel and let me use her car. And, they're there for you, like every step of the way. When I would be feeling down or crying, I could talk to my counselor, and she would be like, it's okay. And as Georgia said, she was in recovery herself. So it just, like, I knew she knew how I felt when there was a roadblock, and it was like, because it's life, there's roadblocks, right? From Homelight, I was able to turn around and get placed in a job as thank you, Georgia, through welfare or government assistance. I completed a class, and what they did was a transitional subsidized employment. It's TSE program. I was placed to gain work experience somewhere, and through everything that I had been taught with Homelight, responsibilities, stuff like that, I was able to turn around and get employed with the people that were training me. And then I seen an opportunity, to turn around and become a paid intern with LA County. And so I applied for that, and, I ended up getting a permanent position with LA County. I'm an LA County employee. I found housing. I was able to stay at Homelight for over a year. They did recognize with the family size and the hurdles that I was going through. I was able to stay for a year, and I got into it's low income housing. So I have a 3-bedroom. I could afford my rent. I could afford my car insurance, and I have money saved up that I was able to save through Homelight, and I've been adding to my savings, and that's gonna go into buying a house. I don't know when, but that's definitely in my future. Um, you know, programs like these, I think, are really important for people like me because, yeah, we are redeemable, and there's plenty of us out there. And there you might have 100 people, and maybe 2 only make it. But to me, thank you, because I am one of those. And without a program like this, or just the people, I'm still in contact with Ricardo. My son works for the Homelight. Like, my son, he's security at Homelight. Like, we're still so involved, and not just utilizing services, but trying to give back, because this is what this program has done for me and my family. And thank you guys for having me tonight. Thank you so much.
Bobby Jo, thank you. You're amazing, and we appreciate you so much. We have a question in the chat that I'm going to propose to our panelists. Jessica asks, how do you deal with people who need treatment and mental care but will not take you up on the services provided? There's some people in Venice who have denied the services over and over, and some find a community where they are intense and they don't want to leave that community because they don't trust anyone else.
Well, that's a hard one. One of the issues that I think we all need to recognize is that the availability and access to mental health services is and has historically been woefully inadequate. I remember when you didn't have any mental health coverage through your health insurance, and it was almost impossible to get. That's gotten a little bit better. But we still have a huge discrepancy and disparity between what we can get for mental health services and what we can get for our medical health services. And that is embedded, unfortunately, in our policies and our systems. And I think what's really important to recognize is that, particularly if you're talking about folks who are chronically homeless, they have long street histories. They clearly have some very, very severe mental health issues. Mental health affects their cognitive capacity, that they don't think like you or I think. So when someone walks up and asks them, do you need help? They don't have the same ability to be able to say, yes, I need help. They don't have the same capacity to recognize that they need help. And there's this tension that exists between giving people choice and recognizing when they're unable to make a good choice, and creating an environment or intervention that gets them to a place where, at least if they're going to make a choice, they're conscious of the choice that they're making. And that's a really, really hard sort of center area to get to. And it breaks all of our hearts. I mean, I think we've all got stories of people wonderful people, but for whatever reason have mental health issues that absolutely prevent them from getting the help that they need. And I think we really on a national level need to have a strong conversation on how do we get the help to people who need them, so that we can help them help themselves. That's probably the most heartbreaking part of working with homeless, is seeing people that we know just do not have that cognitive capacity to make a good decision, and there's nothing we can do for them.
Thank you, Mike. We are actually at the 30-minute point of our session. It goes by really fast when you're having a good conversation with friends. If anyone needs to leave at this point, we thank you for joining us and for being a part of our discussion. But if there are any other questions, we will stay on for the next 10 or 15 minutes if anyone has any other questions that they would like to ask our panelists, or if our panelists have anything else that they would like to say to close out our session.
Well, I would just volunteer that this is really intended to be an informal chat. If you've got, it doesn't even have to be on the subject matter of, you know, the myths or the like. So if you've got questions, if you want to know more about what we do here, the programs that we have, if you have folks in your community that could use assistance, you know, how you go about finding assistance, you know, all of those things we're here to be a resource and help answer any questions you might have. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. There's no bad question.
Wendy said she had a question. Wendy, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question instead of typing it, you are welcome to do so.
That might be easier. Let me try that. So I hope this is not too dumb of a question. I really don't know very much about homelessness. And then, so I understand that the reason that there's appearance of homelessness in Los Angeles is because that, like, I was told that the police cannot send them anywhere else because they don't have anywhere. There's not enough services and places for homeless people to go. And so then I guess I'm wondering
I'm sorry, Wendy, you went mute on us.
Sorry. So from the introduction from Mr. Ono earlier, that there's different types of services and different levels of housing. Where is the bottleneck for our city? Where do we need more help? Because we hear these buildings that are being built, services that are, cities trying to put in, it just doesn't seem to be enough.
Well, and that is exactly the issue. So we have since the beginning of homelessness, had a reluctance to fund homeless services from policymakers. The biggest issue we've got is there's just a scarcity of resources. Here's the staggering figure. On any given night here in Los Angeles, 70% of people who are experiencing homelessness have no access to shelters or any kind of safe place just because there isn't capacity. So one of the big things that I really recommend people do is we need to encourage our policymakers to start talking about what it's going to cost to make available the interventions that we need to solve the problem. So there's truth in the courts have basically said if you don't have some place that you can put someone in a shelter bed, you can't be pushing them around because that solves nothing. And it's really trying to pressure policymakers to really think about creating solutions rather than simply moving people around because this neighborhood complained and they're going to wait till this other neighborhood complains and then they get moved around, because we did that for a long, long time. And I'm talking about the royal we, the city and the county of Los Angeles. But the fact of the matter is that there's good news in having homeless be so visible. And that is 15 years ago, when we had a lot of what I call rousting, someone would camp on a sidewalk and the police would come roust them. We drove people into the hills, frankly. We had people who would live up in the hills above Los Angeles. We drove people underground. We drove families to separation. And we never really had a good idea as to how big is this problem. Part of you can't solve a problem unless we know how big it is. And by not rousting people, we're finally being able to see how many people are actually in our city that don't have any place to be at night. And the first step to solving the problem is being able to quantify the problem. The difficulty we have with our policymakers is that they would much rather try and solve a problem by setting a budgetary limit than actually sitting down and saying, if we have 67,000 people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles tonight, what would a plan look like so that each one of those had an intervention that could get them off the streets? And it's a big number and it scares them. But my own personal opinion is I don't really think we're going to make progress on solving homelessness until we really sit down and develop a plan that says, here is something that's going to help everyone where they are, be it prevention, be it rapid rehousing. And again, I also want to call out that this notion that everybody needs their own place is not a solution. We're never going to build our way out of homelessness, but we've got to create pathways so that, and I'll share with you how we solve, I don't know, maybe 25% of our homelessness here through, Uncle Mike. I'll refer to myself, Uncle Mike, is kind of a bum. He would sit at his mother's house and he'd drink all day and didn't work. And finally she kicked him out and he became homeless. Well, if we can help Uncle Mike deal with his substance use disorder problem, help get him a job so that he can contribute, his mother would take him back in a heartbeat. His brother or sister would take them back. So a lot of housing in Los Angeles, isn't a person in their own place. They're shared housing. And we've got to use all of these tools and help recognize that everybody's going to have a different solution. But there are a lot of solutions out there that our existing systems just don't support because nobody is willing to put a little bit of money on it to see that we can get more prevention. We can keep people in housing longer and have them sustainable. But we've let it get to be such a huge problem that the price tag is kind of a deal breaker for anybody running for office, because I've just done the numbers on the back of an envelope, and I guesstimate that we need to be spending between 1.8 and $2 billion a year in Los Angeles to make a dent in the street population. And that's not a number you're going to hear from our policymakers, or we're not going to hear it from LAHSA because it's just such a big number. But I think that's the reality. We've got to owe up to our problem and figure out a constructive way to develop those resources so we've got something that people can relate to, they need, and it addresses their need at the time they need it.
At a limited resources basis, does that mean we should start somewhere? Like, what's a good place to start? Like more shelter bed, just so some people have a place to go to begin with, and it's easier to have a centralized place to provide services? Or is that not even a place to start?
See, that you're raising some really good points, because those are kind of the points of contention that are getting in the way of making progress. So the reason that the narrative is really focused on permanent supportive housing is because at one point in time, there was this thought that, gosh, if we get the people who are really heavy users of our public systems, the chronically homeless, into housing, it will free everything else up and everybody else will be able to start moving through it. Well, that hasn't proven to be actually true. And so we've been spending basically the last 5 years really focusing on pretty much a single intervention, which is permanent supportive housing. And what the unintended consequence of that focus is that we've created a pipeline for people to go from low need kinds of interventions to really high need kinds of interventions, because they're left on the street for that much longer period of time. And what we know is the longer people are forced to live on the street, the more it costs and the more damaged they become to achieve stability in housing once we can finally get some interventions to them. So it's unintended consequences, but when you're squeezing the balloon and you've just got to limit it about, well, and then I'll argue on the other side. Well, gosh, if we do shelter beds, then we don't have any place to put people. So you can see that tension. The real answer is we got to come up with a comprehensive plan and then execute it over time. We cannot piecemeal the solution to homelessness and achieve success.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Wendy. Appreciate your question.
Bill, would you like to ask your question now?
Who?
Bill Cruz had a question that he wanted to ask.
Oh, Bill, you're on mute.
Bill.
That better?
Yes.
Much better.
Yeah. I was just going to say everything you say resonates over here in Australia, probably throughout the Western world. But one of the things that's always fascinated me, or did particularly, is that homeless people, from what I can see, like to congregate. They like to share together and in a way form communities. And I've always noticed, particularly over here, that authorities get really afraid of that. And then they want to move them on instead of working within those communities and filtering out those people who can kind of go and live with their mother or somebody else or somewhere or anything. But how often the power of that community of people isn't focused in a constructive way to get people moving along. It's moving through. It's almost like the authorities, like you said, would rather drive them up into the hills because then nobody sees it, when probably giving a bit more support in there would be useful. The other interesting thing is that when the Olympic Games were held in Sydney, all the homeless people were put up in hotels, so nobody would see how many there were. And it was just insane. So that often the main job authorities try to do is pretend there's not a problem rather than attack it, because often they don't listen to the people who know what to do. So I just wanted to add that I see that with you, and I agree that the more it's evident on the streets, the more chance there is something can be done, rather than just calling the police or moving everybody on. Thank you.
Well, yeah, you've got to have interventions, and we've got the Olympics here in a few 4 years, 2 years, something like it. Anyway, I was kind of hopeful that would light a fire under our policymakers' chairs, so that we would actually see real progress. But I fear that exactly the same thing is going to happen. We're gonna scoop up folks on the streets, put them into hotels for 2 weeks, because it's cheaper than the solution of actually building interventions that are going to permanently solve their problems.
Yes.
There's a couple of questions here I want to get to. Any opportunity to use buildings downtown that are vacant? That's a great idea. And there's actually a lot of activity that's being invested in looking at that, trying to turn them into interventions that are going to work for folks. So it's really interesting, since so many folks have moved to working at home. I think we're kind of waiting to see whether or not that's going to be a temporary phenomenon or a long-term phenomenon. But I think there is a lot of opportunities that may present themselves over the course of the next couple of years to create some really creative kinds of interventions using existing structures. So that's a great question. And you mentioned old malls. That's certainly another option, and old hospitals. There's been a lot of conversation about the old County LA County USC medical building, to turn it into residential, as well as the St. Vincent's Hospital just down 3rd Street off of Los Angeles. So people are poking around at those. One of the challenges is that often the cost of renovation makes it difficult to convince people it's a good idea. But I think people are looking. There's a focus on that. Whether or not we see meaningful change come from that, I think is something we'll see over the next year or two. Joy says, is there a candidate for mayor who could make some real progress on this issue? I'm just going to share my personal experience. My personal experience is that we get people who will say anything and hope people won't remember it. We get folks, everybody's throwing out, we're going to build X amount of housing. They've been saying that since the beginning of time. And the reality is X amount of housing does not get built because it's too expensive, and they don't really have a plan. So if I were to break this down and say, what is our best hope for finding our way out of this? I think we really have to think about creating some kind of policy group that is going to design a comprehensive solution. You know, we've got the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, which you guys may not know that, but I ran that organization for 10 years. And the challenge with it, is that it has absolutely no capacity to make policy. It's governed essentially by the county board of supervisors and by the city council and the mayor's office, and it has no power or any of its own money to do anything that deviates from what the mayor says or any of the board of directors. So it's kind of powerless. And it was designed to be a cushion between public opinion, homelessness, and elected officials. So something that I really think needs to happen if we want to create something that's going to design solutions that are going to stick to the wall, is we've got to have, I think if we're going to continue to have an authority, it needs to be like the transit authority or the airport authority, where it's not a buffer between public opinion and the politician, but the politician is directly accountable and responsible for that. So rather than having appointed commissioners who can be fired, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you're appointed a commission for the city or the county, you sign a letter at the day of your appointment that basically says either the supervisor or the mayor can fire you for no reason at any time. Which means that if they have a different opinion than the mayor and try and make policy, they get fired. So it really just sort of sweeps any notion that they have an impact out from under them. But I think having policymakers actually in the decision-making seat will bring clarity to the problem in ways that they clearly don't understand. And hopefully it will also bring them together in ways that they've not been able to come together in the past. Because another big structural challenge we have here in Los Angeles is that Los Angeles County and Los Angeles City can't stand to work with each other. So there is all of this behind the scenes infighting that gets in the way of progress on almost anything that is something like homelessness, which covers both county and city kinds of jurisdiction. As you can tell, I got an opinion and I'm not afraid to share it, but those are really kind of true issues. And the whole point of having these chats is, you know, we get to talk to each other and talk the truth as we see it.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We appreciate, again, your patience in our having a late start, but we had a very fruitful discussion, and we hope that you will join us in our next virtual roundtable. We will be sending emails out to let you know when that is. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all. Have a great night.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.